Hello and welcome. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on the carbon markets to answer a really big question. How does a nature-based carbon credit actually come into being? We're going to get right inside the rulebook of Verra, one of the biggest standards bodies out there, to see how an idea, like protecting a forest, gets turned into a real, verifiable, and tradable asset.
Okay, so right off the bat, you run into this huge challenge. It's not like building a solar farm, where you can just, measure the electricity it's pumping out. A forest conservation project is all about measuring something that didn't happen. You have to somehow prove that these trees are still standing when they otherwise would have been chopped down. How do you even begin to do that?
And then it gets even trippier. A ton of carbon that you lock away in a tree today is completely worthless if that tree goes up in smoke tomorrow. So the second huge problem is permanence. How can you possibly guarantee that the climate benefit you're claiming right now is actually going to last for, say, 100 years?
So these two questions, they really get to the heart of what you could call the carbon credibility problem. Because without a super rigorous, standardized way to answer both of them, the entire market for nature-based solutions just, it falls apart. No one would trust it. So how do you build that trust?
Well, you build a rulebook, a massive one. And this is exactly where organizations like Verra come into the picture. They create this comprehensive standard, basically a set of ironclad rules and procedures that every single project has to follow, no exceptions. The whole goal is to bring consistency, transparency, and real scientific rigor to the entire process.
Now, at the very core of this rulebook is something called a methodology. The easiest way to think about it is like a recipe, a very, very detailed, scientifically peer-reviewed recipe. So whether you're restoring a peatland in Southeast Asia or protecting a rainforest in the Amazon, you have to follow the specific recipe for that project type. It ensures everyone is cooking with the same ingredients and measuring their results in the exact same way.
The very first step in any of these recipes is establishing what's called a baseline. A project has to tell a credible, data-backed story of what would have happened if it never existed, the business-as-usual scenario. The actual climate benefit, then, is the difference between that story and what really happens thanks to the project. You're basically comparing two different futures.
And that leads us to probably the single most important and honestly most debated concept in the entire carbon market, additionality. It all boils down to one simple question. Would this awesome climate-friendly project have happened anyway, even without the money from selling carbon credits?
Verra's own standard is crystal clear on this. For a project to be considered additional, that carbon finance has to be the deciding factor. It's got to be the thing that pushes it over the finish line. It can't just be some nice-to-have bonus for a project that was already profitable or was going to happen anyway.
So how do you actually test this? Well, projects have to go through a whole series of checks. First, is it already required by law? If yes, it's out. Second, is it financially viable on its own? If it makes a ton of money without carbon credits, it's out. And third, is this just what everyone else is doing in the area? If so, it's not really additional, is it? It has to clear all these hurdles.
Okay, so let's say a project has proven it's additional. Fantastic. But that only solves half of the credibility problem. Now we have to swing back and tackle that other massive challenge we talked about, permanence. How do we make sure that carbon stays locked up and protected from things like fires, pests, or even political chaos?
And the answer, you guessed it, is another incredibly structured and detailed tool. Verra uses what's called the AFOLU non-permanence risk tool. Now, AFOU just stands for agriculture, forestry, and other land use, but all you need to know is that this tool is basically designed to systematically stress test a project for everything that could possibly go wrong.
So every single project gets this intense risk checkup. Auditors dig into internal risks, like does the management team actually know what they're doing? They analyze external risks, everything from land ownership disputes to the political stability of the country. And they model natural risks, like the future threat of wildfires or superstorms, based on the latest climate projections.
And the level of detail here is just wow. This is just a tiny little snapshot for the project management piece. You can see how different factors add points to a project's risk score, while having good mitigation plans can actually subtract points. And look at that, if you're missing something critical, like a plan for how you'll adapt over time, you can just fail right then and there. This process gets repeated over and over for dozens of factors.
So after all those points are tallied up, you get a final overall risk rating for the project. So in this example, let's just say the project gets a risk score of 25%. Okay, great. Now what? What do you actually do with that number?
This is where the whole system gets really, really clever. That risk rating isn't just a score,
It's used to fund a kind of collective insurance policy. It's called a buffer pool.
So remember our project with the 25% risk rating? Here's the deal. It doesn't get to sell all of the carbon credits it generates. Instead, it has to contribute a matching 25% of its credits into this shared buffer pool. These are real credits, but they're taken off the market and held in reserve as a form of insurance.
This pool basically acts as a mutual insurance fund for every single nature-based project in the entire Verra system. So if one project suffers some unavoidable catastrophe, let's say a massive wildfire that nobody could have prevented, then an equivalent number of credits are canceled from this shared buffer account. This makes sure that the loss is covered and that the integrity of every single credit already sold on the market is protected. It's a safety net for the whole system.
So the project has proven it's additional. It has an insurance plan for permanence through the buffer pool. We're almost home, but there is one last, absolutely crucial step before a single credit can be born.
And that is the verification gauntlet. The project has to hire a totally independent third-party auditor who comes in and checks absolutely everything. We're talking paperwork, satellite imagery, they even do on-the-ground site visits. Their entire job is to confirm that the project followed its recipe to the letter and that all the climate claims are 100% real.
And only after a project has survived this whole exhaustive process, only after it's passed that independent audit, is it finally allowed to issue credits. And the final product is this, a verified carbon unit, or VCU. Each one of these represents 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent that has been officially verified, validated against the standard, and insured against reversal.
So as you can see, this system is incredibly complex, it's incredibly detailed, and it's all designed to build trust by tackling the toughest questions head-on. But as this market keeps growing and facing more and more scrutiny, the real question for all of us is this. Is this incredibly intricate rulebook strong enough to make a real, lasting difference in our fight against climate change?